no clothes, which is quickly, I am not kidding when I say, a lot of people don't believe me, but I was pre-med in college. I study a lot when I want to do something. I've listened to your book 4 times this week on 1.4 speed, and it is quickly becoming one of my favorite books. It's frightening, and it's I don't know how else. The way I word it is this: is everyone knows about Dwight Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech, but it feels so old, and it's in black and white that it's abstract. Your book was it's similar to David Vine's Base Nation. Completely different books, but somewhat similar in that it's a very modern kind of illumination of what you call the blob, the deep state, the entrenched power structure. And before I even forget, I did want to make a note of saying, as someone that has 1,187 audiobooks in my library, I wanted to tip my hat to you for having an incredibly bipartisan, balanced book. And in today's day and age, you can listen to a book and it's great and you get through 75%, then all of a sudden it comes out with Trump is Satan or Obama is Satan, and you're like, oh, come on, do we have to do that? And I say that sincerely, you did a beautiful job at representing the pros and cons of the last several administrations. But I have now been rambling for 90 seconds, so how about you tell everyone about yourself, Bill?
Well, okay, so Tommy, first of all, let me just say I don't use the word blob. I probably don't say deep state.
Yeah.
So you're already a bad reporter. But the truth of the matter is that I describe what I call the Perpetual War Machine. And it really is a reasonable update of the concept of the military-industrial complex, which is to say that we're hardly an industrial nation any longer, and most of the defense contractors, even the ones who produce metal, also produce software, and software is what drives the American military today, and it certainly is the largest portion of the cost. Even in aircraft and ships, software is really the most expensive element. So I try to describe this entity, this perpetual war machine, this juggernaut, if you will, because I wanted to wrap my hands around the question of why do we have perpetual war? Why do we seem incapable of ending these wars? And what are the dynamics that are behind their continuation? And so briefly, I'll say that the perpetual war machine to me is what has grown over the last 20 years since 9/11, that favors technology and the network over the human resources which are applied to the military problem or counterterrorism. And that's really a reversal of what we saw in kind of the heyday, if you will, of the war on terror, when hundreds of thousands of troops were used to invade Iraq in 2003, when surges were undertaken in both Iraq and Afghanistan, with the idea being that somehow troops on the ground, boots on the ground, were going to make a difference in these conflicts. And they might have, in the end, saved America's bacon or saved the American military's bacon, just in the sense that those additional resources were needed to facilitate the withdrawal and facilitate, the ending of a stalemate. But as I say in this book, here we are in 20 years later, and you can't really argue, no one could argue that Iraq or Afghanistan or any one of the 21 countries where we are bombing and killing today are safer than they were 20 years ago. So we've been fighting, and now with the announcement of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we're even ending fighting, but we haven't achieved any of the goals that we set out for ourselves when we started, which was we're going to eradicate al-Qaeda. Well, that hasn't been done. We're going to decimate the Taliban. That hasn't been done. And we've seen the emergence of the Islamic State, ISIS, that now is not only a powerful force in places like Afghanistan, but is spreading rapidly throughout Africa and the Middle East. So the effort is disconnected from the result. the effort has its own momentum. It has its own. It has autonomy, and why I call it a machine is that it is also increasingly invisible to the American public. I mean, most Americans have no connection whatsoever to the military, and certainly the fact that we are at war and we have soldiers deployed all over the planet most people are oblivious to that. It's hardly covered in the news media, and the human resources that are applied are increasingly lower and lower. So let's take Afghanistan as an example. Joe Biden says we're going to withdraw from Afghanistan, and yet at the same time, we're not really ending fighting because the preponderance of the means of fighting has shifted from boots on the ground to this worldwide network. So the targeting takes place in South Carolina and Tampa, Florida. The intelligence analysis and collection takes place at Fort Gordon, Georgia. The preponderance of the imagery is analyzed in Virginia and in Missouri. You have this dispersed, magnificent worldwide network that supports a very few number of trigger pullers of fighters on the ground in places like Afghanistan or Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Somalia, Niger, and on and on. And this shift in ratio, where for every one trigger puller on the ground, for every one soldier, that there are probably tens of thousands of people behind them. Other soldiers, civilians who work for the Defense Department, and of course contractors, the most important new element of this military capability. That really has been the change that has occurred since 9/11. And we forget that in these 2 decades that have transpired since 9/11, so much of this technology is new. A global internet, an ability to fly drones anywhere on the planet, precision-guided weapons which are guided by satellite coordinates rather than by lasers or by optical means. So essentially, it means that you don't really need to be on the ground if you've got good coordinates. I mean, if I want to kill Tommy Kerrigan, I want to basically find out where he is with great precision. And that's done from units that are, in New Mexico, in New York, in Virginia, in Hawaii, whenever they essentially come up in the schedule of being the overwatch for the operations that are going on in the Middle East and Africa. And that system, that worldwide system, which only the United States possesses, which only the United States operates, has really matured in 20 years to the point where when Donald Trump decided in January of last year that he was going to kill the Iranian general Soleimani in Baghdad, it wasn't really a question of, hey, guys, can you do it? It was really more a policy question of what were the implications.
Yeah.
The assumption all along as the Trump administration deliberated this killing was that the machine knew what it was doing. And indeed, the machine had intercepted his communications, had drone overwatch, which literally watched him get on an airplane in Damascus and land in Baghdad and get into his motorcade and drive out of the airport, and where they killed him on the airport access road out of Baghdad International Airport. I mean, that machine was never questioned. And so we have this ability now to kill individuals, and that really is still our focus, ironically. But I question whether or not it's actually achieving the strategic goals that we want. So I already talked about Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and ISIS, but really in a bigger picture, I want to just say, are we diminishing terrorism, and are we even depleting the ranks of terrorist organizations? And I think the answer in both cases is no. So we have to bring these wars to a close because we're not getting anywhere. That's the reason. And we need to think of other means by which we're going to fight terrorism in the future. And I think that the only way we're going to do that is to really appreciate and understand what the dynamics are behind this perpetual war machine. And then secondly, it's going to be for the American public to engage itself in these military affairs, because one of the ironies of this technologically driven backwards machine, where so few people are on the ground, is that it's also really invisible to the American public. And so therefore there's very few levers by which the American public is engaged. So people are on the streets about race, they're on the streets about climate change, they're on the streets about so many issues, and yet we don't have a peace movement in America anymore. We don't have any kind of anti-war movement. And the reality is that in 2021, there are more Republicans who are in favor of ending U.S. military operations overseas than there are Democrats.
Yeah, it's so many things to touch on. So I'm just going to grab one, pulling it out of the air.
Yeah.
I love the balanced approach you take in your book, where you bring up the threat and danger of a war that's so whitewashed. And when you get the burger from the drive-through box and it's a burger in a little box, you don't see the cow being raised, the factory farming, you don't see the implant, the diesel fuel, and you don't see you just see and which is great. Hey, I love it. But there's a danger when I've had on drone operators on this podcast, MQ1 and MQ9 Reapers and Predators, and they talk about, you go for your night shift and you come home and you tuck the daughter in, maybe play some Xbox, but at the same time there is, and this is the balance you put in your book, it is an achievement and a half. When we only need one guy, and that guy can stay at home and operate the drone, instead of sending 16 million Americans to the Pacific where you're slaughtered on islands that no one can pronounce. I still can't I still can't pronounce it. But then, the dangerous side of that is we are so removed that we don't feel it. And moving from that, you talk about how we're also, if you will, we're almost moving the Overton window of what is an acceptable target. You said it earlier, I was going to say it, but the machine is more concerned about their effort than the results, which is, it's great for kindergartners, A for effort, but in the real world there has to be results. You go into, and I believe it's chapter 8 is convergence, where it's we move. I did listen to it 4 times this week. Is you move to where we're changing the semantics of what is a target. It's a war on drugs to a war on drug traffickers to a war on narco terrorists, and it's like, there it is. There's a thing. It's a war on this to you're a terrorist and you sell cocaine, and that cocaine goes to this group, and that group used HSBC banking, and that helped this. You are now funding ISIS. By moving the goalposts, they can say that there are still an infinite number of targets. And that, to me, is terrifying, because, maybe we do God willing, we bring everyone back on 9/11. We don't have to keep doing these surgical drone strikes, which, by the way, when you kill one guy, you'll leave out his 4 kids and his wife, and now they all become insurgents. And, hey, I don't blame them. How do you not? By moving everything, are we moving out of the Middle East? Are we really ending war, or are we physically moving out of the Middle East, but are we just going to be engaging a new target? Are we going to see a rise, and all of a sudden, do we have to take on the cartels? Are they going to find something else to sink their teeth into? Or is it going to move into the cyber domain? Are we going to have a new Cold War in that, it's already going on, that we need to fight China on every front, in the institutions and in the airwaves? Do you think that is what the perpetual war machine do you think that's what they're gearing up for? Because it seems eerie that they're just leaving the Middle East. This isn't their
Well, we're not leaving the Middle East. That, first of all, that's what's clear. Okay. Even fighting in Afghanistan will continue. Maybe not with American boots on the ground, but it'll continue. It'll continue with airplanes flying out of the Gulf. Airplanes flying out of Iraq and Jordan, airplanes flying out of Turkey, airplanes flying out of Uzbekistan and the Caucasus. So I don't see an end to fighting. So the nature of that fighting shifts. And that's what really we're seeing in Africa and in other parts of the world where the United States continues to pursue terrorists. Now, you bring up convergence, and one of the points of that chapter was not just how terrorism becomes a sort of resilient, self-licking ice cream cone that can produce any kind of enemy for the future, but also I compare the war on terror to the war on drugs. So the war on drugs is this, now I think it's been going on for 50 years, and I don't think there would be anyone who would say really that we have done anything other than have a war on drugs, which is to say that heroin, cocaine continue to find their way onto the streets of America in great abundance. And so that here's the perfect example of where the outcome is separated from the effort. So we fight a war on drugs and put resources into doing so. And I'm not arguing necessarily that that's a bad thing. I'm just arguing that we never ask ourselves the question whether or not we're actually achieving anything. And in every year in which we articulate the war on drugs, we say to ourselves, yes, we need to not just interdict the drugs coming into the United States. We also need at the same time to attack the root causes of what are drugs. Well, the root causes of what drives the narcotics industry is not just the economic need of Colombia and other places where drugs are grown, including Afghanistan, by the way.
Yeah.
It's the American market.
Yeah.
It's the Western market. And so let's address the root causes. Yeah. Sure, I think we should. But if we put all of the resources into the military and we put all the resources into the war, then we're not really addressing the root causes. And similarly, I would apply the same standards to the war on terrorism, which is to say that is counterterrorism in the future, now that we've sort of adjusted ourselves to the reality that terrorism is probably going to exist forever, is counterterrorism of the future a law enforcement and security matter, or is it a military matter? And I think that there's probably a movement afoot in the Pentagon and in military thinking that's sort of accepting that we need to apply more law enforcement, legal, and developmental strategies. But it's not going to happen as long as the military is the dominant institution and gets the preponderance of resources. And we sort of saw that in the last year over COVID as well, which is to say that everyone said, yes, look, see, this is what happens when we put too much emphasis on national security and not enough on public health. And it was a great talking point. Everybody said it. But now the national security establishment has had its revenge, and no one is talking about taking resources away from national security to put them into public health. No one is uttering that at all. So a year ago, everyone was saying, yeah, we need to reorder our priorities. And now it's like, nah, forget that. We're going to be back to military first and national security first. So this is a juggernaut. It is a there's no one at the controls per se. I don't think that anyone goes to sleep at night in the Pentagon and says, we've achieved another day of fooling the American people. I think they are doing what they are told to do, and they are doing it as best as they can do it. And they are doing it more and more efficiently. But efficiency does not necessarily equal success. So the truth of the matter is that my iPhone of today is better than my iPhone of yesterday, and my iPhone of tomorrow is going to be better than my iPhone of today. More efficient, better apps, better everything. But does it make me a better person? Does it make me a better communicator? Does it make our society a better society? And we know that the answer is no. And that is exactly what we have with the military as well.
So yeah, I mean, I can get a 4K webcam, I can get some overhead lighting, but I'm the same stumbling idiot. Is Man, it's. I feel like this episode is quickly going from geopolitics and the war state down to a philosophical sense. Is the whole purpose of this thing? Are we all just keeping ourselves busy? I mean, what's from the Bhagavad Gita? Before enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water, like buckets of water. After enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water. You know, is Sisyphus really pushing the boulder up every day? Is he miserable or is he in heaven? There's nothing. You know, when a video game sucks is when you beat it. A video game's fun when you just can't beat it, and you got the grind. Man, is that what it is? Are we all just keeping ourselves busy? But you're right. I don't think there's a guy twirling his mustache a mile under the Pentagon, you know, some Dick Cheney clone saying it's all coming together. It seems like, we're all just, they're doing their part that they've been trained to do. And, you know, and what are you doing? Do I want to send 5 guys over there and get killed, or do I want to have 1 guy piloting a drone? Well, there you go. You don't want to kill an American life. Beautiful. Can I, now I carry 1 bunker buster that weighs 20,000 pounds, or can I outfit 10 JDAMs with dumb bombs and little lasers on them? Oh, okay, we're doing it more efficiently. Do we have to send CIA agents there to follow Soleimani? Oh no, we can just follow his metadata. It's just becoming more and more efficient, but to what end? And do they look further than the concept or the phenomenon of blowback? Are they just playing whack-a-mole infinitely? Is that what's going to go on?
Before I answer that question, Tommy, I want to elaborate on one point, because there is a winner.
Defense contract.
The winner is Washington.
Yeah, defense contract.
Right? The national security establishment, not just the defense contractors, but the consultants, the experts, the bloviators on TV, et cetera, they are the winners. There's no question that they are the winners. Washington is the winner in this bazaar of the theater of war. And they always are the winners, because no one is ever held accountable, and they move from job to job, and they move from consulting gig to consulting gig, and lobbyist effort to lobbyist effort. And it doesn't matter who's in office, and it doesn't matter where we're fighting or what we're fighting. They're the same people. So right now you've got these guys who are like big names, big influencers, I believe we call it in this modern era, on Twitter. I did this little research. John Brennan has 924,000 followers on Twitter. John Cipher, a former CIA guy, has 201,000 followers. Mike Hayden has 292,000 followers. And I'm thinking to myself, these are the architects of the failure of our national security system, and they are the most influential people right now talking about national security, constantly telling us what should be, when really they are never really held accountable for what was. So the very people who brought us 9/11 20 years ago are still the people who are telling us how national security should be run. That's an insane system. And when Joe Biden became president and chose Lloyd Austin to be the Secretary of Defense, retired 4-star general, we can't find a competent civilian to be the Secretary of Defense? The truth of the matter is that it doesn't really matter if it's Lloyd Austin or some other general. They're completely interchangeable, because I would defy anyone in America to tell me what battle Lloyd Austin ever won in Iraq or Afghanistan, what war he ever won in Iraq or Afghanistan. The guy was the commander of U.S. forces in Iraq when the United States withdrew in 2011. We're back because we misassessed the entire situation on the ground. And yet this is the person we choose to be the Secretary of Defense, which means literally that the fox are guarding the hen house. So there is a winner, and I think it's not as simple as you say, the defense industry. Yes, of course, everybody makes a profit, including NBC and Fox News and MSNBC as well. Everyone makes a profit. That's not the point. The winner really is Washington. The winner really is the national security establishment. And the national security establishment is never held accountable for the result. Never held accountable for the result. not held accountable for 9/11, not held accountable for the WMD failure in Iraq, not held accountable for their misassessment of what was going to happen after Saddam Hussein was deposed, not held accountable for our failure to eradicate al-Qaeda or the Taliban in Afghanistan, not held accountable for ISIS, not held accountable.
Yeah, it's I was going to say, yeah, I was just thinking civilian Secretary of Defense. I mean, the last one, at least in my limited knowledge, would be McNamara, right? He was the CEO.
No. There were, Ash Carter under Obama, Leon Panetta. Okay. I mean, Chuck Hagel under Bush. I mean, there have been civilians. And though Chuck Hagel ended up being a terrible Secretary of Defense because he didn't have the managerial skills, he's the perfect example of a veteran of the military who was a senator, who in theory was exactly the model of the kind of Secretary of Defense that we wanted and needed. But I'm not arguing that the Secretary of Defense needs to be Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson. I'm arguing that the Secretary of Defense needs to just be a genuine civilian, because our country is supposed to be run on the principle of civilian control of the military. And civilian control of the military means that, let's just say Bill Arkin was the Secretary of Defense, that I would say to the generals, I've heard your argument, but for the good of the country, for the good of America in a bigger sense, for the good of the economy, for the good of our health, I'm saying no. But when you have the military in charge, then the military is only offering military solutions. And we could get into a discussion, Tommy, about the what's happening to the American military, because right now they're so gaga for climate change and fighting extremism and diversity, incorporating transsexuals into the military, et cetera, that they could hardly find their rifles if they had to. And that's the American military today as well. So the culture of the American military is also important. So you have this kind of three types of militaries within the American military today. The military that's fighting in Afghanistan and the rest of the Middle East and Africa, that's kind of the special ops, drones, covert operations, intelligence part of the military. Then you've got this ginormous Army, Marine Corps, ground force, conventional warfighting thing, and they're all like flying around with their flags saying Russia and China, and give us, let us be on the field, coach. Come on, we want to play. Yeah. And then there's this third military, which is this politically correct military, which shifts and changes with every flavor of the month in Washington, and it hardly is doing military things. I mean, yesterday, I am not joking you, the Secretary of Homeland Security announced the new initiative of the Department of Homeland Security for climate change. So a department of our government that costs us $50 billion a year, created to fight terrorism and protect us from terrorism, has now found another objective to be part of its mission creep. And, 10 years from now, when we have a terrorist attack in the United States, or when something really bad happens, or when we haven't solved the immigration or border problem, et cetera, people are going to say, we need to get that Department of Homeland Security back to basics. But why aren't we saying it now? And why aren't we saying it as well about the military? That also is the perpetual war machine, because again, they sort of operate on their own. They're autonomous. Mm-hmm. They're autonomous.
But you're right. It's Washington's the winner. So what's going to happen when there's another 9/11 in 2040, and we're going to say we got to get back to no more Mr. Nice Guy. We got to stop pulling the punches. We got to open up the black sites again. Not that they ever closed, but by then, a whole new generation has come, and everyone that's screaming, hey, I remember when I was 11 during 9/11, they said this, but by then you're old and no one cares. And the machine it's like what they say about fusion research. Fusion research is job security. We'll have it finished in 40 years, and by the time that 40 years comes up, you go, oh, we didn't finish it, I'm retired. But we got some new guys coming in, and they say that we can have it ready in 40 years. No, it's job security. It's going to keep going and going and going, and by the time it all circles back and we're at deja vu, it's not going to matter. There's going to be a new crop of people coming in, and the checks are going to keep going, and the machine's going to keep growing. And how do you challenge that?
One of the implications, Kami, of fighting for 20 years is, of course, that you have to keep training and re-educating the new cadre of military people who come in. So in 2019, as an example, for the first time, soldiers were enlisting in the Army and the Marine Corps and the Navy and the Air Force who weren't even born on 9/11. So there are people now in the military, like, let's say it's been 20 years, so probably close to 90% of the people in the military have their entire careers only fought the war on terrorism. So in 2018, when the Pentagon announced we're going to now shift to great power competition, we're going to shift to Russia and China, it really was more of a statement that said we have to get everyone in the American military retrained and reoriented towards conventional warfare. And so I mean, yes, it's the case that in 2003 and in short periods thereafter, there were tanks on the ground in the Middle East. But the truth of the matter is, if we were really honest with ourselves, we would have to even look at China and Russia and ask ourselves the question as to whether or not we will ever use ground forces in conflict in those areas. I mean, in a real war, yes, of course, the United States is going to posture against Russia over Ukraine, and Russia is going to posture against the United States and NATO over Ukraine. But let's just imagine for a moment if there were a real war with China, if China decided that it wanted to expand out of its own territory and take over, Nepal, take over the Russian Far East, etc. I don't think we're going to be fighting a ground war.
No.
Because today, with air power and missiles and precision-guided weapons, the ability even to mobilize the forces to get them to a port, to get them to an airport, to get them to an airfield is going to be almost impossible. Mm-hmm. And there are a limited number of those assets. So therefore, everything is going to be fought in this sort of long-distance remote warfare. And yet, at the same time, we're still spending the preponderance of our military dollars on ground forces. It makes no sense.
If just thinking, if to play devil, I agree with what you're saying, but to put my mind in their viewpoint, maybe it's kind of like when you're in like the 30s when skyscrapers were going up in Manhattan every other week and they're all beating each other out by 10, 20 feet. You have to build you could say the ground forces are the first 900 feet of the building. Like you have to do that just to get on par, and then you raise up the spire or the pole or the tip of the building, and that's where the battle is won. Without it, you almost can't posture. So just playing devil's advocate, maybe you have to sort of fill out all the ground forces, check all the boxes, if you will. Although it doesn't make sense because you're right. This isn't World War I. We're not putting everyone on trains, and this isn't the Kaiser Wilhelm's army. The Schlieffen plan. We're not doing this thing. It's once you start seeing with the satellites that are 30,000 miles up using infrared, and you see all of them getting onto their APCs, you're just going to hit that with a direct ammunition. It's not going to be anything like that. There was an Onion article in like 2005, and it was like, when World War III breaks out, it'll be an exceptional several hours of conventional weapons before the thermonuclear holocaust, because that's where it will go. It's like what Eisenhower said. A general will never not use everything they have. And if you're losing and your country's falling, and let's say you're China and you were trying to expand and it's not working, and now your 100-year plan is falling straight on its face, you're not going to not use what you have. And if you've got a couple, Fong Deng or Dongfeng hypersonic missiles, and you got some thermonuclear warheads on them, you're going to go out, and you're not going to go out being disgraced. So it's going to be a conventional build-up with some ground forces waving the flags. It will very quickly turn into a nuclear winter within half an hour.
Well, I think you're wrong.
Okay.
But let's look at it in the broad sweep. So in the 1940s, not so long ago that we can't conceive of it, we didn't have an Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a model of the military, Army and Navy, and that model had pretty much persisted for a couple of 100 years. And then all of a sudden, the model of the military shifted and air forces emerged. And in the last 2 decades, we've seen another shift with the emergence of a credible cyber force. The design of the military and the emphasis of fighting it changes. It changes over time, and it will continue to change. And the peak of the nuclear era was probably around 1967. That's when the U.S. Had the largest number of nukes that it ever possessed. The Russians were about the same at the time. And today, there is one 1/10 of the number of nuclear weapons that there were in 1967. So the numbers have declined. Of course, there are greater efficiencies and capabilities than there were in those days. But I'm not so convinced of your model. I think that what we'll see in the future now with the creation of Space Force and though I think Space Force is stupid, I think it's the right approach, which is to say that the sacrosanct design of the American military around these services as they exist is not set in stone. And the emergence of cyber in space has become something that challenges the notion that warfare only takes place in these 3 dimensions, on water, on land, and in the air. And so I think that as the military continues to make these adjustments, the design of the military will shift and change over the next 5 decades or so. Whether the Army, which is the most powerful institution within the U.S. military, stands in the way of that evolution will be the crucial question. And my guess will be that, like many battles of the past and the assimilation of new technologies into the military, there will be people who will argue that tanks are still the kings of the battlefield, et cetera, and there will be others who will argue that they don't have a chance of surviving and they should just go the way of other pieces of military equipment in the past, cavalry, et cetera, that just were no longer survivable and no longer is capable. I think that's going to happen. It may not happen in our lifetimes. And unfortunately, we don't really have, or I don't know of, great Clausewitzian thinkers about the military who are articulating this future design, but we need to have that thought. And I think it's another good reason why we should really look more closely at perpetual warfare, because the emergence of the global network, which is also, by the way, the sort of foundation of being able to fight against China or being able to fight against Russia or being able to fight against North Korea or Iran, that is really the ground forces that you describe. It's the first 10 stories of every skyscraper of the military. If you don't have the communications network and the internet connectivity and the databases behind it and the bandwidth to move the information in real time, then you can't fight. I mean, literally, when NATO goes to fight in Afghanistan, it cannot do it without the United States refueling its airplanes, providing it with the targeting coordinates, helping it with the weapons on board its ships, its aircraft. The United States has the global network that is the enabler of warfare all throughout the world. And the Chinese and the Russians, of course, would like to have their own networks and would like to have their own countries in their camp, but they have no possibility of competing with the United States on a global scale. And if we understood that and appreciated that better, perhaps also then, therefore, we would understand and appreciate how our four main adversaries are also feeling incredibly insecure and feeling like they need to compete with the United States in these domains. So understanding perpetual war, understanding the development of the network then becomes essential to understanding sort of the American future. And it started in the mountains of Afghanistan. Literally, it started in the mountains of Afghanistan, where all of a sudden you had special operations people operating in a part of the world where there was no plugs, so they couldn't plug anything in. They had to carry their own power with them. And there was no cell phones and there was no internet, so they had to find a way to connect themselves to the global communications infrastructure, and the process by which that then unfolded to be able to operate drones in remote parts of the world, to be able to put soldiers on the ground in remote parts of the world where there where there was no power and where there was no communications fabric and infrastructure, had to be created in order to fight in the mountains of Afghanistan. And that capability is exactly the same capability which facilitates our fighting in Burkina Faso and in Niger and in Mali and in Cameroon, Uganda, in the Central African Republic, in Somalia, etc. We're not getting on the ground and plugging everything in. I mean, we got literally have to bring it all with us, and increasingly, because we don't want to bring it all with us, we have to figure how to deliver it remotely. Mm-hmm. And delivering it remotely has become the American specialty. It really has. But to do it demands tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And that's why the military is so expensive. That's why the military is so back-ended, which is to say that most of the effort and resources are in the back end, not in the front end. And that's the design which we have acquired. And I don't think it's going to change as we shift to Russia and China. I don't think it's going to change in the future, because as everyone knows, for you and I to have this podcast right now, we are dependent upon the laptop manufacturers, the Zoom corporations, the internet service providers, the backbone companies that run the internet, the power companies that power us, etc. That back end of our society, that back end of our very activity that we're doing right at this moment, is the same back end that's actually driving the military today. It's not tanks being manufactured in a plant. It's not ships or being built in a shipyard. It's not bombers being built in some plant. Mm-hmm. It's really being driven by exactly the same thing that drives civilian technology.
Okay. That's a beautiful way to put it. It's in Richard Rhodes' book Dark Sun: The Making of the Hydrogen Bomb. There's a great little like half chapter on Curtis LeMay talking about setting up Strategic Air Command and going into Europe. And for him, he wasn't even as worried about the nickel-plated bombers and enough, fission cores to put in the bombs. He was all about supply lines. I listened to it last night. He was saying, Russia, they don't need to take us out in the air if they can cut off our supply lines. So he said they basically had their own mini NATO. They took a bunch of troops, put them in civilian soldiers, and they carted around supplies in different trains, changed the schedules and the itineraries, but they made their supply lines 3 deep. And he was saying, it's what will win the war is that we can basically turn on the gasoline faucet. Do we still have food and water are our soldiers' bellies full? That's what wins it. Is not And to pivot that, you can kind of see where things are moving. We're posturing to Africa, where it seems there are a lot of the necessary minerals, the rare earth metals, to keep this modern world going.
It's not about a war for oil. It's not about rare earth minerals. Sure. I mean, I get it that in theory, China's preponderance of control over rarefied metals is of concern. Just as China's economy which creeps up on the United States all the time, is of concern. So if you believe that there's a manifest destiny for the United States to be number one, and we are in so many ways, right? You know, people still flood to the United States for tourism, for medical care, for education, etc. We are the country where most innovation originates, etc. At the same time, there is a country on the planet, China, that is probably our true peer competitor. Not morally, not ethically, not spiritually. I mean, it is still a communist society, and it still is a society that lacks basic human rights. But if I'm a strategic thinker, I would be lying to you if I said to you that we shouldn't concern ourselves with China.
Yeah.
Russia, on the other hand, it's a third world nation with an economy that's tiny, and it happens to have a bunch of nuclear weapons. So we have to deal with Russia. We have to deal with the problem of Russia, with its expansionism, with its repressions, with its autocracy. But China is really the competitor. Now, we can approach China by saying, well, we need to find a way to have peaceful, compatible relations with China, or we're going to fight with China over the South China Sea Islands, and we're going to fight with China over Taiwan, and we're going to fight with China over Hong Kong, and we're going to basically front end the military as the most important institution in dealing with China, and that would be a mistake. And so again, the Perpetual War Machine, which ensures that national security is the most important consideration, when in the case of China, really the economy and our adherence to the basic rights which we hold so dear to ourselves in the United States is the most important factor. It seems to me like we kind of have a back-asswards way of dealing with China, and it needs to be revised. I don't think it will be, because I think that national security is this 800-pound gorilla that's not going away and not giving up any power. But maybe through climate change and maybe through economic negotiations, the United States and China will be able to slowly move towards other priorities, towards other priorities. Now, when will that happen? I don't know. I don't think that Joe Biden has the fortitude or the courage to really make a fundamental reordering of American priorities. And Washington certainly is a partisan mess that is not going to be thinking of the American century ahead in any way that is something that we can be proud of. But I do feel like, beyond the question of perpetual war itself, that the national security aesthetic, this part of our culture of nuclear weapons, of the Cold War, of the war on terror, of war, and more war, is basically handicapping us into moving forward in other useful ways.
I've got you for 10 more minutes. So I did want to touch on what I thought was maybe the most interesting part of your book. It's all fascinating, but there's one part that really kind of twisted my mind a little bit. And it was the very nature of these systems as we move away from the patent in his big tank columns, and it's more towards as you said, it's the manufacturing, it's the software, it's the contractors, the chefs, it's the people delivering everything, and the enablers that Obama was so surprised to learn about. As we have this continually networked machine, just like the THAAD missiles and the Patriot missiles, that direct challenge to North Korea, Iran, China it's at their core, it's a challenge to who they are, because there's a great thing you said. A lot of them, the military is not just to defend the nation, it's also to terrify the citizens and to terrify young men into being subservient to the power. Their very power, it can't, just like you could say, what Reagan would always argue was that our free flow of information and capitalism intrinsically was opposed to the Soviet Union. They didn't have that free flow of information. in an odd way, you could maybe argue, I don't know if I could, but I think I could try, is that the very structure of our systematic, our war system could enact more of a change in the world than the actual system itself, because it demands the other nations, if they want to play on the same field of us, if they want to build up the next 10 stories of their skyscraper, they have to have that systemized machine, that networked machine, that would require a fundamental change in how their societies are run, teaching teamworking, teaching openness. And I don't know if they would be willing to do that, and that might be how we beat them, is they're not willing to, it'd be like, how would we beat like a team from, I don't know, like Israel in football? It'd be like, oh, well, they don't train on the Sabbath, so we train on the Sabbath. It'd be something like that. It's a fundamental change to who they are that I either it's going to pull them out of their oppressed systems, in which case they will change, or they will have to stay in there, in which case we will be dominant. To me, I thought that was maybe the most fascinating part, is how that would change them.
So, I've been doing national security since I was in the Army, which was 1974 is when I joined the Army. So I've been doing it now for almost 50 years. And, I remember when I went through basic training and intelligence school that, we learned how to read a map. And today, you have GPS and nobody knows how to read a map anymore. And in fact, for the first time in the last couple of years, there has been additional work done on the whole possibility of what's called the GPS denied environment. So if cyber warfare were able to knock out GPS, how would these soldiers know where to go? And technologies really do evolve and change, and those technologies have interesting and important social implications. I'll give you another example, and then I'll move on to your major point. I don't think I could tell you the telephone number of my 2 daughters.
I don't know my dad's. I know my mom's.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? So we literally live in a punch code society. I mean, we there are things that used to be so essential to our lives, and now, if I lost my phone, I don't know how I would contact my kids. I literally do not know what their telephone numbers are. So, in this changed world, in this networked world, the ability to operate this network and the ability to flourish within this network is a democratizing process. So the truth of the matter is that if you're in Iran or a North Korea or a China, you're spending an enormous amount of your Secret Service, secret police time just trying to keep young people from acquiring information on the internet, because that information is dangerous to the regime, and a free flow of information is dangerous. And they can't really cut themselves off from the internet. There have been attempts on the part of Russia and Iran to create their own internet. But, it's bullshit, because we live in a global society and everyone is connected to the same network and the same capabilities. Well, now let's extend that a little bit into the military, because I'm going to say something that's optimistic. We're now in the era of precision guided weapons, and I think we should give them to everyone. We should give them to Pakistan. We should give them to India. We should give them to China. We should give them to Russia, because the ability to operate those precision guided weapons demands democracy. Demands democracy because it demands decentralized execution. It demands technical training. It demands a democratizing process. It's a democratizing system. And if all of a sudden these countries could only operate precision guided weapons and were no longer had truncheons and bullets and and pliers to pull people's fingernails out, but they only had precision guided weapons, it would be a democratizing process. So we see this, I talk about this in one of the chapters, in the Saudi war in Yemen. A freaking country that has spent more money per capita than any other country on the planet buying military equipment. They have the best airplanes America can buy. They have the best everything that the United States has provided them, and they are not able to fight in Yemen. They are not able to defeat a few thousand rebels in Yemen. And the reason is that they are not training their young men in the technical skills or the leadership skills that are required to operate that machinery. They have to import contractors and surrogates to even be their military on the ground. I mean, I think that there are more Sudanese fighting in the Saudi ground forces, even Colombians fighting in the Saudi ground forces, than there are Saudi young men. And this really is the prime example of how a country like Saudi Arabia is not going to be able to step into the next generation unless it educates its young people and democratizes its systems and decentralizes its decision making so that people are able to actually move with and live with the technology that's at their disposal. So as these governments in China, in the Middle East, in the autocracies, in Russia, etc., spend their time and energy suppressing youth so that they are not having access to these technologies, they are essentially writing their own death warrants. So to me, precision technology, etc., is indeed the future and the democratizing element, even on the military side. And those capabilities that we've developed in the United States military of this decentralized decision-making and decentralized execution, that is really the main innovation that has both created perpetual war, but also at the same time has allowed us to fight in so many different places. And that technology, again, if we were able to actually give it to our allies, I think it would have a positive effect. And unfortunately, what we've done instead is we've tried to reform the Iraqi and Afghanistan militaries to look like our militaries, and we built these magnificent military barracks and gymnasiums and cafeterias so that they would be a military just like us, and it's not what their society can digest. It's not going to be sustained beyond the United States being there. A friend of mine in the Air Force once said to me, when we bug out of Afghanistan, that country is going to have the most magnificent set of gyms in the third world. And it's true, we built them. We spent billions of dollars on this physical fitness. But the truth of the matter is that may not be the model that is conducive for that actual country. But I think as we get to the place where everyone has this similar military capability and model, the precision model, it's going to be a process by which we will see peace.
So instead of the pamphlets, instead of the B-52s dropping the pamphlets saying that, come to the good side, we should just start dropping JDAM kits.
We should just start dropping laptops. And more cell phones, because ultimately that's what's going to make people want to be part of the globe.
Yeah, seriously, if you just dropped like 100,000 iPhones with some unlimited satellite service, that would probably enact a greater change than anything else. I have kept you for an hour. I did want to say we don't need to go into it. For anyone listening, I recommend books all the time. This is legitimately one of my new favorite books. go get it. If you put it on 1.4 speed, you can listen to it in a day. I know that because I've listened to it 4 days in a row.
And you sound like Mickey Mouse, though. But
it's actually good. Your narrator's voice is deep enough that it actually converts well. There's a whole science to it. You can't listen to all of them fast. Some of them, this one's good. Yeah. The very ending, the epilogue on coronavirus, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone listening. I loved it. It's crazy because it's fact. It reads like the beginning of a zombie movie. NORAD, the closing, and the military opera, the blue and the silver teams. I loved that. I won't spoil it. If you want to hear about it, you got to get the book. It's an awesome ending. It could be a script for a movie, and I hope it is. Bill Arkin, thank you, my man. It's an awesome book. It'll be stickied in the top comment. It'll be in the description. I highly, highly recommend it. I haven't recommended a bad book yet. I love it. It's one of my new favorites. I would be honored to have you on again with any of your other books. I'll send you an email. You don't need to confirm or reject and break my heart right now. But thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. I cannot say it enough. I'm fanboying. I loved your book. It is up for anyone that listens to this podcast. It's up there with Raven Rock in terms of my favorites, or The Ghost, James Jesus Angleton. It is up there with those. It is an instant classic for whatever that's worth. I love it. Now I'm running in circles and making a fool of myself. So thank you. And
the check's in the mail, Tommy. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. No, you said
those nice things.
You said the quiet part out loud. What are you doing? man? I'll send you an email when it's up. I would love to have you on for another book, but I will let you go because I have now kept you for an hour.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. God bless. God bless America.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. It was awesome. Thank you. God bless America, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.